Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Introduction to Pathfinder Second Edition seminar. Welcome to GenCon 2019. Woo! Get a little room noise going. I am Jason Bullman. I'm the Director of Game Design at Paizo, and I'm going to allow the panel to introduce themselves before I start going over kind of what we're going to be doing here today, and we'll just go straight down the line here.
Hi, I'm Liz Liddell. I'm the Senior Editor at Paizo, and I was a developer for the Pathfinder core rulebook.
I'm Mark Seifter, designer at Paizo, and one of the creators of the Pathfinder Second Edition core rulebook. And
I'm Logan Bonner. What Mark said, I'm also a designer and have worked and this GM screen and this character sheet back.
And the condition cards and the combat tracker and the, oh boy. So there's an awful lot of stuff that just dropped here today at Gen Con. We are really excited to kind of talk to all of you about it and give you a sense of what Pathfinder Second Edition is all about. This is really kind of a very introductory seminar. So if you've heard us talk about Pathfinder Second Edition in the past, you're probably going to hear us say some of the same things again. But now that the game is finally fully out and in everyone's hands, or at least they're working their way through massive lines right now to get it in their hands, you know, we can kind of talk more freely about everything that the game is. There's no more secrets. We can't hide anything. You have the books now.
And even as they're in line, they could be on their phones on Archives
Yeah,
of
that's
Nethys.
right. Yeah, no. Yeah, Archives of Nethys has already gone up as well. That
Yes.
went up here today. So for those of you interested in checking out the rules, you can find them on the Archives of Nethys for free. You can go take a look and see what the game's all about.
It's pfrd.info.
Oh, that's right. So, you know, this is a journey that started over 3 years ago. I think the primary design started about 3 years ago. To be honest, we started talking about Pathfinder Second Edition like the day First Edition went to the printer. And not because we were like, yes, let's plan it, but it was just, there are things that were left undone. There were things that we couldn't do in First Edition. First Edition was tied very closely to 3.5. And because of that, there were things that didn't make sense at the time. It was too big of a change or too big of a shift. And to be frank, I just didn't have the time to do the sort of design work that we needed to do. So for Pathfinder Second Edition, I would say that about 3 years ago, we really started knuckling down and trying to figure out what this game was going to be, what it needed to be. And that journey took us up through a playtest that was long and very challenging. You know, I think the playtest taught us a ridiculous number of things about the game we were building, what was working, more importantly, what wasn't working. And, you know, we spent basically all winter, all fall and winter and into early spring.
Sorry, editors.
Yeah, sorry, editors. Frantically trying to make this game into the game we all want it to be. And I think we kind of did it. All of the early reviews and all the folk looking at it are really quite happy with what they're seeing.
And the playtest itself, we structured kind of differently than our previous playtests. We did a bunch of surveys. We got a lot of really good data, and it was just very thorough.
I think the thing that we did differently there is that we were actually stress testing the system. In previous playtests, we release a class and we're like, hey, play the class and tell us what you think. Well, there's so much variability there. Like, what did you play? Is your GM a softball? You know, like, what level are you playing at? None of those are variables I can control. All I can get is, yes, I like this. No, I don't like this. And that's useful. Certainly good information. But it's not the sort of information we knew we needed for a second edition of Pathfinder. So Doomsday Dawn was there for us to stress test the system, to really push some of the mechanics. And we tried to make it as fun and engaging as possible, but ultimately it was still a stress test. But that actually bore a lot of fruit and allowed us to really fine-tune the game. So enough about that, though. Let's talk about what Pathfinder Second Edition is. The big thing that we're trying to make sure everybody understands about Pathfinder Second Edition is that our primary design goals for this game was to make it easier for everyone to learn, faster for everyone to play, and keep what makes Pathfinder Pathfinder, which is the ability for you to tell your own stories, add the depth to your character that you want. The choices you make about your character define that character. They add abilities, they add things you can do. They make the decisions you make about your backstory add a robust level of kind of reality to your character. That's choices you make, and they have an impact on the table. In all the years of Pathfinder, that's a thing that, you know, our game is known for, is that you can imagine almost anything, and there's a way to make it in the rules. But before we go too far deep into that, let's talk a little bit about how the game plays. Let's talk about the proficiency system. That's such a key component to the whole system.
Before we get to that, can we get a quick just like poll of the room? How many of you have played Pathfinder First Edition?
That is most of the room.
Yeah, it's almost everybody.
How many of you played the playtest?
That is about a third of the room.
Yeah. And for those of you on Twitch, how many of you? We can't see you, but just raise your hands. All right. Yeah.
Just
okay. That's a lot. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I digitally know now. I don't. I have no idea how many people are even watching. Okay. That's good to know. But it is amazing to us how many people were like, "Yep, there's a playtest. That's cool. I'm busy. We're in the middle of Rise of the Rune Lords or something. We ain't got time for that." And we're just like, "I'm sure it'll be good." Meanwhile, we're sweating bullets like, oh, is that enough? Is that everybody? What do they think? But there's so many folks who just kind of were like, yep, I'll wait until the final comes out. Well, here we are. So there's a number of key concepts in Second Edition that are worth kind of exploring and talking a bit about. And why don't we start out with, I'll come back around. Why don't we start about talking about the proficiency system? Logan, you want to give it that a shot?
So the proficiency system is kind of the core of how you build most of your stats. So your attack bonus is going to use the proficiency system. Your skills are going to use the proficiency system. Your AC is going to use the proficiency system. Your saves are. If you played Pathfinder 1, you know that each of these kind of had its own progression for how you built your bonus. And we wanted something that was a little more clear-cut, that made the numbers more comparable to each other, and that is going to give you kind of a more direct idea of how good you are at various things. So the proficiency system is broken down into untrained, trained, expert, master, and legendary. Those are kind of the 5 different ranks of proficiency. And each of those is going to determine your bonus. So you can kind of say, well, I'm an expert in perception, but I'm only trained in reflex saves, for example. And that's going to tell you kind of the ballpark of your stats, as well as your ability modifier going into them. So untrained is just 0. So if I'm untrained in something, I'm not adding anything to it. I'm just using my ability modifier. Being trained adds your level plus 2. And then each rank above that is going to add another 2 to that. So expert is 4 plus your level, master is 6 plus your level, and legendary is 8 plus your level. So that means that kind of as you're going up in level, each time you're increasing your proficiency rank, that's a plus 2, which is in the math of the game, is a pretty big boost. So you're really going to feel that when you increase something. So for example, every 2 levels, you get a skill increase, which is going to increase one of your skills by 2. And so you really like, I just got significantly better at that skill each time you get one of those pieces. Plus adding your level to it, so you're kind of getting a little better at everything you're trained in as you go up. But if you go from trained to expert, you're going up by 3 instead of by 1.
So I think the key takeaway there is that it's one formula. It's one thing you need to learn. And once you do, you understand how the core engine works across the game. Right? So, I'm a master at reflex saves. Okay, that means you're level plus 6. I'm an expert at stealth. Level plus 4. I'm only trained at using the longsword. All right, level plus 2. I'm untrained at wearing heavy armor, but I'm forced to wear it so that we can sneak into this place. Yeah, you add nothing to your AC. That system is there to be like, yeah, we teach you a formula once. First edition had formulas all over the place, and they certainly served a very good function, but they were all basically trying to do the same thing, which is tell you how good are you at this thing. So coming up with a unified system allows everyone to understand that at a glance without having to dig through, countless tables and parse out, some of those formulas were like, half your level plus 2. Yeah.
Versus a third.
Versus a third.
3/4. And it also means you can compare some of the statistics to each other more often. Like, if you were trying to compare somebody's bluff bonus in first edition, which would be deception now, versus another person's will save.
Those were 2 different scales.
Will save was either
it
1/3 or 2 plus a half, whereas bluff was full level plus 3 extra for training skill. That was just, they were never going to work. You were going to just succeed every time. Now we use deception versus perception. So I should have probably said intimidation versus or diplomacy, but
it allows us to do those sorts of direct things. So we didn't need combat maneuver defense anymore. We could just do a trip attack against your reflex DC.
Yeah.
So
So you
take your
just use the
reflex, add
athletic
10,
skill. Yeah.
and
Yep.
it's a skill check. And those number systems now play with each other. That allows us to make the game quicker to play. It's
Yeah.
easier to understand.
And the proficiency also kind of expands out into other parts of the game. So, for example, we have skill feats. You're going to get a certain number of your feats that are dedicated just to getting better at your skills, and those are kind of gated by your proficiency. So if I'm an expert in crafting, I can take better crafting feats than if I'm just trained in it, and master gets better ones and so on.
So before we get too far off in the reads, Liz, do you want to talk a bit about the modes of play?
Oh,
because
sure.
that is a big thing in the book now.
Yeah, so in Pathfinder First Edition, you had this idea where sometimes you were in a combat encounter, you'd roll initiative and play, and then outside of that, you just weren't. And we have codified that with the second edition to have 3 modes of play that really represent sort of how your characters are interacting with the game world and how much risk they're at any given time. It also sort of sets the time scale. So the one we're all familiar with is encounter mode. That's where you roll initiative, things work in rounds, you're using your actions on your turn. When you're not in encounter mode, you're in exploration mode. You're wandering through a city and talking to people. You're exploring the dungeon, but you're not fighting anything yet. You're traveling across the countryside. When you're not adventuring at all, you enter the third mode of play, that's downtime. This is when you're resting, you're crafting, you're recovering from that illness that you picked up on your last adventure, you're working your day job, you're doing all those things that you're doing while you don't adventure. So there's components that come into play regardless of what's happening in the in-game time based on which mode of play you're in, and you swim back and forth between them as the story demands it.
Yeah, and you find in play, like it's going to play a lot, kind of the same way as First Edition and a lot of other games. Like it's pretty flexible. You don't kind of say, all right, we're going into exploration mode now. But
It's
like
not a
as the
flag
GM,
you put on the table. That's like, oh, we're in exploration mode, everyone. Hold
turn
on.
the wheel.
Yeah.
yeah, the screen doesn't like blur out and then everyone gets replaced and then suddenly music starts playing for an encounter.
Right.
If we could make that happen, we would, but we can't. But no, it is a very fluid thing, right? And the only reason we gave names to it is so that we could more succinctly build rules, right? So, and a lot of those rules just speak to how the various types of play interact with each other, right? So what you are doing while you are exploring the dungeon will impact how you enter combat when the door breaks down and there's a troll on the other side. Right? So if you're like, oh, I was sneaking away from the party, well, that now has rules that mean something. It's not just up to the GM to be like, I don't know, I guess you're hiding, maybe. I don't know. Right now, that's actually part of the game. It says, oh, no, you get to roll stealth for initiative instead of perception because you were trying to hide. And if you roll high enough, you start the combat hidden. You get that as a perk before the combat even begins. So there was never a chance that the troll could see you or know that you were there. You're automatically behind the crates because you are probably pretty good at stealth if you're actually doing that. And that makes that more impactful, more meaningful. What you are saying you are doing actually means something.
And it's more likely you'll succeed overall because in First Edition you would have had to roll the stealth and then roll initiative. And if you've messed up on either one of those, you could have messed up. Here, if you roll high on that first one, you're also going first.
Yeah.
And something Jason dropped there that if you didn't play the playtest, you might not know is generally you roll perception for initiative now. We don't have a separate initiative stat. Instead, we kind of say, however you're approaching the combat, as Jason said, is what you're going to roll. And by default, it's perception in most cases because it's about your awareness of, incoming threats.
Yeah, did you see the troll when it burst through the door, or were you busy staring at your own shoes? I mean, it happens, right? Every adventure is like, is my shoe tied? Oh my God, we're being murdered.
Sometimes your shoe attacks you and you actually can
That's what you get for putting on mimic boots. Yeah. All right.
use your cobbler skill for initiative.
That's right.
You put your foot directly in its mouth.
That's right. Yeah, no, I mean, you're basically feeding it. All right. That kind of forms some of the basics of the game, but let's get into the meat. The meat, which is combat. I mean, let's be honest. You're playing a bunch of murder hobos. So, you're going in the dungeon. You're going to end up in fights. You're going to draw your weapons, and you're going to go fight some people. And this is one of the areas of the game that we spent a lot of time refining. It's such a critical part of the game. It's that moment between life and death for your characters that we really wanted to make sure was as smooth and fun of a process as possible. And that starts with there's two things in here that I think are definitely worth explaining. One is talking about the action system, and the other one's talking about how crits and all of that plays together. So, Mark, why don't you start off by why don't you talk to us about how the action system works?
All right. So once you have gotten into an encounter, and you'll do that by rolling an initiative roll based, like we said before, on what you were doing, you have your turn order for everybody in the combat. So you go turn by turn, and on the person's turn, they as soon as your turn happens, you get 1 reaction and 3 actions. Plus, if the GM decides you were aware of what was going on, even though you didn't go first, you might have a reaction before your first turn. With that 1 reaction and 3 actions, that determines what you can do during your turn. Each of your actions can be spent to basically take any action. You don't have standard actions and move actions and swift actions. Certain activities that are really complicated, like casting a fireball, might take more than 1 of your actions. Or a trample monster ability could take 3 because they're running all around the battlefield, trampling everybody. With your reaction, you can use that anytime, even off your own turn. Because of that, they always have a trigger that tells you, okay, this is when this is going to happen. So, for instance, attack of opportunity is a reaction with a trigger that's based on somebody doing something that might drop their guard, like moving around right near you, or like pulling something out of their pouch. Well, certain types of actions trigger the attack of opportunity. When the trigger happens, you can, but don't have to, choose to use your reaction, and then it's used up until your next turn. There is also a free action, which some of them can be used on your turn, like your 3 actions, and then in that case you use them in order. Some of them can be used off your turn. They will have a trigger, and you can use them like a reaction, but doesn't take your reaction. At the end of your turn, if you have any actions left and for some reason you refuse to use them, they're gone, and you'll get them back on your next turn. So that's it. There's not any complex combination. There's not like, oh, but there's some kinds of actions that take until the next turn to complete, or this action uses up 2 of the other types of action. It's just actions.
So I think there's an element to this that is easy to get lost, but you know, it comes to your turn, you get 3 actions. Most of the things you do in combat are 1 action. Mm-hmm. Drawing a sword, making an attack, moving, opening a door, closing a door, sitting down, falling up in the corner and crying.
Stepping carefully 5 feet away from your foe.
Yeah, exactly. All of these are just 1 action, and these form kind of the core basic actions of the game. These are actions that everybody gets. They're one of the things you need to learn when you first start playing, because everybody has these actions, right? Moving around, making attacks, basic stuff. And then all of your characters will add special actions that only you can do to your mix. So, but those are based off the choices you make. So you don't have to learn all of the things a fighter can do if you're not playing a fighter. Those aren't relevant to how your character works. Now, you might want to know them anyway because it's fun, exciting stuff. But fundamentally, you just need to learn the cool tricks and abilities that your character gets. So you learn the core, and that includes the proficiency system, the 3 action system, and then your character modifies and adds to that based on what you want to play. So at its heart, we tried to make a core game experience that, you know, I can explain to you in, you know, we're 19 minutes into this panel, and you are already most of the way there to understanding how the game plays.
And to kind of give you a point of comparison, like say I'm a first level fighter in Pathfinder First Edition versus a first level fighter in Pathfinder Second Edition.
Yeah.
If I'm that first level fighter, I can move up to my speed and I can attack. And that's kind of my options.
In first edition.
In First Edition. In Second Edition, I can move up to my speed and attack twice. I can move up to double my speed and attack once without having to take any kind of special action to do so. I can pull out a weapon and attack twice. Like, because it's so flexible, there are just a whole bunch of different ways you can build it, and that becomes kind of even more pronounced as you go up in levels, because in First Edition, once you start getting multiple attacks per round, then it's like, well, I can stand here and attack multiple times and maybe move 5 feet. Whereas if you're playing that same character in Second Edition, I can move up to my speed and attack twice. You know, still, I probably have some special actions that might let me, take a swipe at multiple people who are near me with a couple actions and then still attack one more time. Or, you know, I can take a 5-foot step and attack and take another 5-foot step. It introduces a lot more flexibility into the system. And it, especially for martial characters, means they play a lot more loosely and have a lot of different strategies.
And the goal there is to give you kind of a rich tablet of tactical options based on the situation at the table, right? And that depends and varies wildly based on your character, right? The fighter's going to have a whole bunch of actions that allow them to take advantage of where people are located and being next to people and making additional attacks and kind of exploiting character weaknesses with weapon attacks and stuff like that. The wizard doesn't have any feats like that. No, the wizard has feats that allow them to expand and alter their spells via meta magic. That's their choices. That's how they get more out of the game, is that they have abilities that allow them to make more out of their magic. So all of these class choices all end up being different. They all play with the same chassis of basic abilities, and then they bolt on all of the things that your character is specifically good at, so that when it's your turn to go, you're not doing the same thing as everybody else at the table. You know, you're doing what makes your character special.
Yeah, like that first level fighter, if they took the sudden charge feat, they could spend 2 actions to move double their speed and make an attack.
Yeah.
So
they basically get one free move because they have the ability to charge up and attack. That's what they're good at, running up and getting into the fight. So there's another element to this that's worth noting, and that's how critical success and critical failure works in the game. This is another thing that's universally kind of applied to the game. And the way it works is whenever you beat the DC, you succeed. Whenever you fail the DC, you fail. But if you exceed the DC by 10 or more, it's a critical success. If you fail the DC by 10 or more, it's a critical failure. Now, a lot of things don't necessarily do something super special on a critical success or a critical failure, but many things do. Attack rolls, for example, don't have a critical failure effect, generally.
But
there are some monsters that are like, if you make a critical failure on an attack roll against me, I rip your weapon out of your hand, or something like that. Mm-hmm. But as a general rule, those things don't apply. So, you know, swing to your heart's content. But critical successes, there's a lot of effects there, generally speaking, double damage or an additional bonus, depending on the weapon you're using, things like that. Whenever you roll a 20, you still figure out whether or not it's a critical failure, a success, or a critical success, but then you bump it up by one category. So let's say you're a peasant and you're attacking a dragon, and the dragon has an armor class of 40, and you have an attack bonus of 3, and you roll a 20, and you're like, yeah! And the GM's like, well, that's still a critical failure because it's a 23 against a 40, so you're still 10 below my AC. But don't worry, you rolled a 20, so instead of a critical failure, it's just a failure. Oh, the peasants go home and they hire adventurers. That's what happens. So, things like that really allow us to expand out what spells can do in the game, what attacks can do in the game, because we've got not just you succeeded and you failed, but you really succeeded or you really failed. This really allowed us to do some things with spells that allowed spells to kind of keep some of their classic themes, but not be the automatic like, yep, this is the best spell to cast of 3rd level because you're paralyzed now, and even if you fail the save, that's it.
So you might have something like paralysis on a failure lasts for a little bit.
Yeah.
And on a critical failure, then it really lasts for a long time. So like you're still going to get that effect out of it because they failed, but you won't necessarily end the combat forever by them failing one single save.
And very importantly, on the flip side, because it was those saver dice that you guys told us for years were causing problems, because it was not fun because the fight was over, or it was not fun because your wizard just frustratingly did nothing. So on the flip side, if they succeed against your paralysis, they still lose one of their actions on their next turn. They get slowed. For a lot of monsters, they have a routine that you can pretty significantly disrupt it by taking one of the actions away. They need a critical success in order to completely avoid the effects.
So this has a really interesting end effect on the game that isn't immediately obvious, but you'll all learn it soon enough now that it's out in everyone's hands. It means that as you go up in level, fighting monsters that are significantly lower than your level, they're still interesting challenges because their first attack can still generally kind of hit you if they roll well, and they can still be a part of the game. But when you turn the tables on them, that ogre that beat you up when you were 1st level, now that you're 7th level, almost every attack you make against it is going to be a crit. and you can just wipe ogres off the board, which makes them their role changes in the game as you go along. So it really does help enforce the idea that you become a more powerful hero, that you're advancing in your skills and abilities. And obviously the flip side of this is also true. If you're facing a monster that's significantly higher level than you, you're in trouble. Run. That's not good. Fighting against level 15 dragon or something when you're level 10 is really not a good idea. That dragon is going to tear you limb from limb. It's going to crit you constantly, and that's going to deal double damage, and it's really going to hurt you really, really quite quickly. So that's one of the reasons why we're pretty careful in the new game about handing out bonuses and stuff, because it doesn't just affect whether or not you succeed or fail. It also starts pushing around the metrics of critical failure and critical success.
Like Logan talked before about how +2 is pretty significant. If you're sitting at a particular point that's around the halfway point on the D20, you needed like a 10 to hit with your attack, and you get a +2 to that attack roll, that gives you 33% more damage because of the fact that it gives you 2 more hits and 2 more crits. So that's a lot for a +2, and that's what it does.
And Jason also mentioned that that criticals apply to everything. That's also true of like skills.
Yeah.
So like there are a whole bunch more things you can do with skills where if you roll really high, you're going to get, additional information. And if you critically fail, you might get misinformation. There's a lot more kind of shades of interest in kind of how the skills work. Similarly, like Jason mentioned earlier, you can use athletics to do some of what used to be called combat maneuvers. So like if you try to knock somebody back, you're going to knock them back further if you critically succeed. And
yeah, it allows kind of a deeper narrative connection to the dice rolls. It's no longer just, oh, I succeeded or I failed. It's not binary. It now has more variety to it, which allows the story to be kind of bigger when the dice really go your way, or you're fighting something way above or way below your level. It's more. There's more there.
And
now.
to be fair, like Pathfinder First Edition had a fair number of these, especially in skills, where it was like, well, you fell by 5 or more, the trap goes off.
Yeah.
So I mean, we got the idea from the fact that those were very successful in Pathfinder First Edition, although we kind of felt that 5 was a little bit of a small window for it not going off, and 10 kind of works for us a little better. But
it also just makes the math so much easier.
it's so easy to calculate, and it does some interesting effects on the die.
It's a really handy tool for the GM too, because when you're just making something up on the fly, you can just kind of be like, okay, I have a rough idea of what they'll figure out, and then you can be like, oh, well, that's a critical success, and I can give them a little more. It's something that's really easy to kind of just improvise.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to open it up to questions here in just a bit, but before we do, I want to kind of give everyone here at the table a chance to just talk about their favorite thing in the game. I'll start.
That we didn't already talk about.
Yeah, no, that you didn't already talk about. And whoever has an idea first can go first. Liz, go ahead.
I'm going to speak a little bit to the next panel, but the thing I like most about this game is that it has a very clear and simple character creation process. So we have a whole section of the book that's dedicated to creating a character that walks you through step by step. It is simple. It is easy. You don't need to hold the hands of newer players. So it really just plays into this whole aspect of the game being really easy to learn and very fast to play, even for someone who's not necessarily familiar with RPGs.
And it kind of walks you through the life of your character, so narratively it's really satisfying.
Yeah, you learn more about who your character is and not just what your character's numbers are.
And this was part of the book that I personally took a very deep interest in. But Liz, your assistance on this, your guidance and your feedback was invaluable.
That's because I care a lot about it.
Yeah, no, in making this part of the book amazing. Chapter 1 is kind of the key, right? It's the intro to the game. We teach you about the game and we tell you how to make a character. And if that end bit isn't smooth and clean about here's how you build your character, why you're not going to play the game, because without a character that's pretty hard to do. So we really worked very hard to make sure that chapter 1 was as clean and smooth as possible. And it was a lot of work, but it really plays out well. So
since I have the bestiary sitting right in front of me, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite things, which is kind of how we've revamped monsters. So in Pathfinder 1, if you had made your own monster, we kind of said, here's the process for making a monster. But it was really easy to just get a monster that didn't really work. Because you're kind of building it like a character, and that doesn't always work for monsters. So, internally we had all the tricks. It's like, oh, well, we have to give this a +8 natural armor bonus to AC to make its AC not terrible. For second edition, we kind of flipped that and said, well, we're going to do top down. So whatever you need the monster to be, that's where you start. And so you're kind of starting with monster benchmarks and building your monster much more quickly and having it do what you really want it to do. We also, and you'll see this in the bestiary, put a lot more effort into giving monsters unique abilities that kind of make sure that they get the right effect in combat that we want. And part of the thing that helps us with this is the action economy. So we can kind of say, well, we want it to be able to do this fairly quickly. So we can make that a one action thing. So it's still costing it some of its turn, but it can do it without kind of eating its entire turn if we made it a standard action.
Could I build on that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Along with that breakdown of making the building monsters shorter, we've also made the stat blocks a lot shorter and a lot easier to use at a glance.
And you also, you don't have to pick like, here are all the monster's feats. Has this many hit dice. It has to have 5 feats. It's just kind of like, well, what should the monster have? That's what the monster has.
It can do things thematic for itself, and you don't wind up with, say, an owlbear that is the same thing but worse than a tiger, which I discovered when we were going through it for second edition. I was like, I played all of first edition. I never realized that the owlbear was just a tiger that didn't have bounce.
I know the owlbear has some of Jason's favorite little abilities in there. When
it came time to write some of the monsters for second edition, I kind of went through the book and cherry picked some of the ones that I'm like, I want that one and that one and that one, because they're monsters that I grew up as loving as a kid. And the owlbear was on that list, the minotaur was on that list. I mean, Bullman, and things like skeletons and zombies and things like that have some of my. And it's throughout the bestiary. It's not just the things that I wrote, by no means. The bestiary is filled with awesome, iconic things for every monster. And what we were really trying to go for was when the monster showed up and did that terrible thing to you, you would go, oh yeah, I should have seen that coming. Yeah, no, that perfectly makes sense. So when the owlbear knocks you down and starts just gutting you to feed to its young, like regurgitate your organs to its you go, oh yeah, I should have really expected that. I mean, that is what owls and bears do. Or like when the skeleton spends its reaction and collapses into a pile of bones, and you're like, haha, we defeated it, and then on its next turn it puts itself back together. You're like, oh, I should have seen that coming. That's kind of some of the fun stuff that's hiding in the bestiary. It's filled with great stuff.
All right, I think I came up with something, because the 4 degrees of success are mine. I was thinking of monsters. Let's do multi-classing by archetypes. So in Pathfinder First Edition, I built a lot of characters, and I made character build guides, like the Rogue Eidolon's Guide, Fighter, and Rogue. And there are a lot of things I always wanted to build, but that I just could never bring myself to build because it was just very bad to build that character in Pathfinder First Edition, and it usually involved multi-classing combinations I wanted to play, but it's like the system punishes you heavily, and then maybe there's a prestige class to patch it. And I feel like multi-classing via archetypes, where you always progress your main class no matter what you do, and then you can take the parts that you want from the other classes to the extent that you want, is something that just opens up so many character combination concepts to me. Like, I would never have been able to do something that just mixed and matched multiple martial characters and casting characters. Like, imagine trying to play a Fighter 10, Wizard 10 without Eldritch Knight. But like in the new game, you could make a character that like multi-class Monk and Bard, and that's actually pretty cool because Flurry of Blows is a single action to take 2 attacks. So you've got actions to spare to do a performance pretty easily. And
I'm going to inspire myself to be courageous.
Right? Exactly. And you could do that. And hey, you know what? If you had did something else to get a mount, you could spend the last action, 1 action to have the mount move up to twice its speed, 1 action to punch twice, and then 1 action to inspire.
So,
or So there's a lot of cool combinations you can do with multi-classing.
So what you're saying is that if you're going to make a monk bard, you're going to be going to a lot of poetry slams?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right.
It had to be done.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Jason, it's up to you.
All right.
One of the things with multi-classing using archetypes is the proficiency system really helps with that, because you don't have kind of the weird progressions you could get in first edition where it's like, well, these stats are kind of weird, but I guess I'll live with it.
My will save modifier, base will save modifier is now plus 20 because I multi-class 10 times into will classes and I have plus 0 on reflex at level 10.
So I'm in love with so much of this game, but I'm gonna give the answer that you're not gonna expect, which is I love all the stuff that didn't change. I love that it's still at its heart the same game that it was when first edition dropped 10 years ago. You still dream up your own stories, you still invent your own characters, you still bring those to the table, and you still go on crazy epic adventures with your friends and tell stories together. That's what Pathfinder is. It's a tool for you to have fun with your friends and share a story together. And that didn't change. That's the first rule in Pathfinder First Edition, and the first rule in Pathfinder Second Edition is this game is yours. Use it to tell the stories you want to tell. Use it to share moments of happiness or sorrow. Use it to have a laugh. Use it to explore what it means to be somebody else. That's what's special. That's what I love about this game. And Second Edition, everything we did was in service to that. And I hope you all really enjoy it. So why don't we open it up to some questions? We'll start with folks here. I think what we'll need is for folks to queue up at the mic, and every couple we'll take one from Twitch. So feel free to go right ahead. I should note, if you're talking to that mic, you will be broadcast onto Twitch. So understand. Let's try and keep it PG-13.
Where do I click I agree?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, it's right there. Yeah.
It's like, okay. All right. So mine's actually kind of a two-part question, but it kind of centers around the same general thing that I'm dealing with here. I run a game. It's 3 women and a guy as my players, and we were discussing Second Ed, and I liked some of the stuff I saw in the playtest. Wasn't so sure about some of it, but it sounds like you guys have done some really amazing stuff. But this was the promise I made to them. I turned to one of my players and I said, when we can remake your Oread Arcanist who rules a kingdom and leads armies, and by the way, my whole party is mythic. When we can recreate this in Pathfinder 2, we're going to make the switch to Pathfinder 2. So here are my 2 questions. First off, I'm really excited by this idea of multi-classing by way of archetype, because this sounds like an awful lot of the stuff like the hybrid classes or the Arcanist or something like this might be recreated through that, rather than through a whole new class that I have to wait for a book to come out in like 6 years or something like that. So I'm wondering if that's what you're shooting for. Are you going to be replacing the hybrid classes that we have in First Ed with this concept?
So we haven't made any firm decisions on what we're doing with any of those particular classes necessarily, but you certainly can emulate a lot of the hybrid classes in a way that you never could until we built the hybrid classes in ACG in First Edition. Right. So whether or not we eventually make any one particular hybrid class of the class later on, there's a lot that you can do right now. And even for the Arcanist, honestly, some of its concepts
you can make it pretty close with the wizard.
Yeah, some of its concepts have been taken into the wizard of being able to like switch out your spells every once in a while. Or
you have an arcane thesis, and that's going to give you some kind of special ability. And one of the theses is like, I'm not satisfied with just being able to prevent my spells once. I can swap them out.
And there's feats for the wizard that are kind of similar to exploits where you do weird things like switch the spell, like, my resist energy is cold, not fire in the middle of the spell, or things like that. So you might be able to get that with the wizard.
Yeah, and I think it's going to depend a lot on the hybrid class. I think there are some hybrid classes, like I would say like the Slayer, where it's like we don't know if there's really enough gas there to give it its own class unless we come up with something new for it. But there were some existing ones that I think had their own like very unique niche that is going to be enough for a full class.
Because the Slayer, like the Ranger does most of what the Slayer did, and with multi-class Rogue, you kind of do all of what the Slayer did.
So one thing I want to note before we move on to the next question is, I'm not sure if it's up just yet. Was trying to check on our website. There's a conversion guide that's going up very, very soon. Now, what this isn't going to do is tell you exactly how to make, every class from first edition. But what it does include is some advice on what you could build using the pieces in the core rulebook to get something close. Okay. And most of the classes, you can get kind of close. I would say there's 6 or 7 from first edition that are like, yeah, I don't have rules tech for you yet, Summoner. I'm sorry. We just haven't built the pieces for that yet. There are ways you could do it, but you're going to be a little far off. I think Arcanist is actually one of the simpler ones, to be honest. You did also mention Mythic.
Mythic and Kingdom ruling, and
some
I
of that.
was happy about the downtime rules that she mentioned, but
I think some of that's going to come over time.
Okay.
I think some of it you can probably use very similar systems from first edition, and it's
I
not
was
going
wondering
to be a
about
problem.
that. Like, there's not much cross between what's on your character sheet and what's in the Kingdom rules. So how much of the Kingdom rules
you
could
could
I
probably
just,
kit bash it pretty easy, at least here to get you going.
Every subsystem that I've tried to use when I've converted APs has worked fine without really any conversion, except if there were DCs to change the numbers of those.
And you're also going to be able to, with the kind of downtime actions, will give you a really clear framework for doing something like Kingdom building. And one of the Age of Ashes AP volumes is going to have something that's not quite Kingdom building, but if you look at it, you'll be like, oh, I can figure out how to.
Well,
and the Kingmaker Kickstarter.
And the Kingmaker rules are going to be out next year. All right. Thank you very much.
Cool. Yeah. So
thank you.
I love giving you guys my money. So.
Yeah, we like taking it.
So I have a player who, from first edition Pathfinder 3.5, that was his favorite things, 3.5 specifically, but he is the type of player that I'll take 2 levels of this, I'll take 1 level of this, I like this ability, blah, 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 blah.
He's
So when I saw the
game.
character creation for Pathfinder Second Edition, where did you get your inspiration to make characters so modular? Because it was just like a message sent from heaven. It was like, this is exactly what he does. He only likes this ability from this class, so he'll take just enough.
I think one of the big things that we really tried to do was to make sure that at every time you gained a level, you got to make a meaningful choice about your character. And a lot of the design space flowed from that kind of basic concept. Mm-hmm. And so, early on, we started realizing that there were a whole bunch of different metrics in the game that were all trying to kind of, in some respect, do the same thing. Like you had rogue talents or barbarian rage powers and all these sorts of things floating around, and they were all on different systems and they all had different names, and we were like, you know what, let's just standardize. Let's try and find a way that all these things are speaking one language. That way that language is interchangeable, right?
And you acquire them the same way, but they don't do the same things.
Yeah.
So there's still
your base acquisition method is the same from character to character, but what you do with it and what you can make happen with it changes. So that's kind of where that all came from. And I think it played out really well.
And I think some of the modularity of also comes from, like, we saw how much people liked archetypes in first edition, so that was a big inspiration. It was like, we know this is a really popular part of the game. How do we bring that forward? Are there ways we can make this work more smoothly with the rest of the system? Because it was kind of a bolt-on in first edition, which was like a really good bolt-on. But still, if you can go into the system with that in mind, it makes it a lot easier.
And from my perspective, the modularity, or working on modularity, used a lot of my computer science background, where we always learn about modular object-oriented design and how that makes it more extensible, easier for other people to build things. That's exactly what we want. We want it to be easier for you guys to make your rules, to make your house rules without crumbling 5 other unassociated parts that you didn't realize. So.
I highly appreciate it.
Thank you. Why don't we take a question from Twitch?
We have a question from Twitch. It is, how much of Pathfinder Second Edition was made with the intention to help people switch over from 1E to 2E, whether they be experienced or new GMs?
That was a concern for us, right? I mean, we definitely wanted the general goal is to make the game easier for everyone to learn. Pathfinder First Edition players are certainly counted in the group of everyone. I think the thing that was a challenge there that we had to work with was, we know that Pathfinder First Edition players have certain pieces of language stuck in their heads about what things mean. And if we change that too much when it comes to Second Edition, it just adds confusion for them. Whereas the new player actually has an easier time because they don't have that. So I think that's kind of the big place where the challenge is.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's much more to be said than that. And considering how much time we have left, let's try and do these a little bit more rapid fire. So we'll just let one person answer, and then we'll keep things going.
Right.
So
It sounds like the hybrid class options are pretty potent. How did you make the say the standardized purebred classes stack up to that level of customization?
I can kind of talk to that, I guess. So it comes back down to this idea of how in first edition, rogues had rogue talents, barbarians had rage powers. Every class has class feats that you choose as you go up in level. So you're always adding these pieces onto your character. And that's kind of that same piece of modularity where we wanted the classes to be customizable. We have these options of feats that let you make those choices for what your character does, and so we can just apply that across the board so that you're choosing them in the same way. They all have the same name, but they all do something different. So you're able to really, like, at every level, pick something new that is meaningful to your character.
And the multi-class archetype is usually going to get a lower level feat than straight up class would. So
multi-class 3 times, you by that point you're giving up like a really high level class feat to do that.
Yeah. It's just a balance game of like understanding that when we let you dip into other features and abilities, we have to make sure that those aren't overshadowing what the core of your character is. So you can only really trade out class feats for other things. You still keep your core, which allows that core to be kind of the signature of your character.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next.
I'm new to Pathfinder from 5e, so I wanted to know just how much of Galarian has changed from 1 to 2e, or if I could take stuff like the Near SeaWorld Guide or Galarian Humans.
So the big change there is the Galarian, when we first published all of the things, all of that was set in the year 4707. As of today, our year has sprung forward to 4719. So all of the adventure paths from first edition are now canon in the world. So the world itself has seen some pretty dramatic changes. I don't want to, it's not really spoilers anymore. This is where we live now, but like the world wound is closed and the Rune Lords are back and the Whispering Tyrant is free. So there's a lot of crazy things that happened. But a lot of the NPCs are still around. A lot of the nations are still around. Like, I mean, fundamentally, it's not like you're going to go, wow, I don't recognize this world at all. No, you're going to be like, wow, a lot of crazy adventures happened in this world in the past 12 years. I wonder what happens next.
most of the Inner Sea World Guide is still
Pretty valid.
close.
The section on Last Wall, not so much. Oops. All right, thank
Jason,
you.
you broke last wall.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry.
I have another question from All for Games on Twitch. Are barbarians going to get their superstition rage power back?
The superstition instinct for everybody here, it was one of the instincts that was in the playtest, and we cut it very intentionally from the final version because the fan feedback was that some people really enjoyed it, but that it was actually very complicated. It wasn't a good one for the starting game because it involved you saying, I eschew magic, I just don't like it, and you get a bunch of pretty powerful benefits in exchange for that, but that's a playstyle that's more advanced. So we would probably, if we put it back in, it was not going to be in the core book, or I guess that's over here. It would be in a later book after people have more time to learn the system, figure out what to do. Then they start doing, oh yeah, no magic. Let's see how that goes.
And I want to note, on Saturday we have a panel called Paizo 2019 and Beyond. That's the panel that you're going to want to come to if you want to hear about all of the new things happening in the next year. So we're going to be a little coy about that.
Don't
until
miss
then.
it.
Yeah. Next.
I love integrating sci-fi into my fantasy. I loved it when the technology guide came out for first edition. How well is the second edition going to integrate with, like, say, Starfinder and the information previously about technology?
Well, we haven't built guns yet, but I guarantee you it's on our list of things that needs to be built for the new system. So like everything that we build, right? The upside to doing a second edition is you can look back at the last 10 years and go, let's make sure we leave room in the game engine for this to be a better part of the game. And some of those things we snap right to the core. Other things we go, yeah, we're going to leave room. We know what that's going to be, or we have a good sense of what it can be. Let's leave the space for it, and we'll build it when the time comes. And I think things like tech, can work in the new system perfectly well. We're just not there
Yeah,
yet.
there's nothing in the system yet. And I would also say, like, if/when we do it, it's probably going to be, you're going to get a bunch of tech stuff all at once. It's probably not going to be drips and drabs. It's going to be like, here's a whole bunch of tech.
Here's guns.
Hopefully
All
sooner-
the guns.
Hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So.
All right, thank you. We have time for just these two more. That's
Unfortunately, with the aggressive timeline, I didn't get to do all the playtest, but
Sure.
I noticed that there was a heavy design science in the surveys. Was there anything in aggregate that you learned about Pathfinder players that were surprising? And then a second question is, going forward with future classes or whatever, is there going to be rigorous survey design involved in those as well?
I think one of the things we learned, and Mark will speak to like the specifics of the surveys, but I think one of the things we learned that was a bit surprising, because most of the feedback we were getting was like from our message boards, was how positive people were overall when they're actually filling out a survey compared to like the loudest voices on the message boards versus other people who are like, I don't want to engage in this, right? But like the feedback was really positive, even with like the things we knew we needed to change. Overall, people were pretty happy.
So I'll go through my highlights quickly because we don't have much time. So my number one highlight was discovering that Jason said earlier in this panel, everyone's murder hobos. And I always thought, oh, but I'm one of the few people, my groups, they just like to talk and role play it out. I think a lot of you probably are in the same situation because we discovered in the surveys for part 4 of Doomsday Dawn that whether you're an experienced group or new players, whether you liked the game or didn't, across all demographics, like 75% or more of groups tried to diplomacy, even with some Cyclops that you they did diplomacy, even with Cyclops that you had to make checks or they would just attack you right away. This wasn't with the Fae who were friendly to begin with. And so it was very surprising to me that actually we were in a big majority, the people who like to try to role play a lot more in encounters. The other thing that I would say was very interesting was that it ties into what Jason said before in the panel, but a lot of people played the first adventure, liked it a lot, and just said, I'll wait for the book. We don't have time to keep going. So what we dropped off was a huge number of people who rated things as very good. Not extremely good necessarily. Those people tended to stay because, like, oh my gosh, I just want to do the playtest. But this is a very good. Let's go. So I would say those are the two main things, and that we do plan on using a more rigorous survey methodology. After, like, I researched a bunch of survey methodology. We now know what it is, and we're going to try to keep using it.
And to be clear, he researched it before we put out those
Yeah,
surveys. We're very happy with the structure.
I think as one small coat on that, the thing that I learned that I was very, very happy to see was that the Pathfinder fan base is skewing a lot younger and a lot more diverse than I had thought. And that's great. That's fantastic. So, all right, one last question here, then we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, so you, Jason, mentioned in your last canon game about failing forward as a sort of design ethos.
Yeah.
And I would like to hear more about that and sort of what that means in general.
So fail forward is an interesting concept in games, and basically what it means is there are some things in the game that you know the party's going to succeed at. They have to. Right? You're lost in the woods trying to get to the wizard's weird old tower that's somewhere in the middle. You're not going to sit there and be like, well, you rolled a failure 3 times, so I guess you go home, no adventure. Oh, well. That's a situation where we would say this is a fail forward. Even if you fail, you're still going to find the wizard tower, but now it comes at a cost. It doesn't mean that you can't fail. It just means that it will cost you time. Maybe there's an extra fight. Maybe there's something bad that happens. Like, oh, the only way to get there was through the thorn meadow, and now everybody takes 3d4 damage before you walk up to the place. And that was your only way to get there, right? That is what that means as a rule system, because the game sometimes puts you in a situation where it's like, okay, well, you got to climb this cliff, and we know you have to, so keep making checks until you do it. And that's not good gameplay.
It's not fun.
It's just repetitive gameplay. Yeah. And instead, we'd much rather be like, yeah, no, make the athletics check. If you fail, you still get to the top, but you stumble and fall and scrape yourself up a couple times. Take 2d6 damage, and now you're up at the top.
And
great.
We want to make this clear because I know it's been debated online sometimes. This doesn't mean every check.
No.
Jason said this is for the important ones. It doesn't mean at first level you can go to Abadar's vault and say, oh yeah, my rogue is going to get through because it'll fail with the cost, so maybe Abadar's mad at me now, but I opened it anyway. No, you can't get into Abadar's vault. Go somewhere else.
All right. So there you go. I want to thank you all for coming. I've really enjoyed this seminar. We are about to do a character generation seminar next. I'm going to ask that the room be cleared for that so that we can let everybody come in one at a time. I need to do a little thing when folks come in. So thank you very much for attending. I hope you all have a great Gen Con 2019.